allegiance. Sorry, Jill. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry I made you guys sit down and then get right back up. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, or wait, is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. So now we'll break into our work session concerning district budgeting and funding. So I understand Ms. Cates has a presentation.
And just as a reminder, the little black pieces there are very sensitive microphones. So if you do have a quick question for a side partner, it will pick that up. So just advice that they are extremely sensitive microphones, that they work very well for all of our people viewing from home, but that any sidebar conversations will also take place. Even your ruffling of your papers and things will be on there. So just so you're aware, it's working great. We appreciate Brian doing that. And you just one of those things we have to learn. But I'll turn it over to Mrs. Cates and let her share the information that she has for us regarding information regarding budgets.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for being here this evening. I have just a few slides that I've put together, some educational pieces, hoping to familiarize all of you with the budgeting process as well as the funding that we have here in dealing with the school district. Can everybody hear me? Do I need the mic or? Okay. So what I'd ask is if you have any questions, please feel free, ask the question as it comes up. Really informal, but I hope that this will help those that are new to the board as well as those that have been around for a while. So the first piece, and I hope you can read that, that's kind of tiny. I've illustrated for you the 8 funds that we have our various dollars here in the district and how they're placed. This is developed based upon governmental accounting standards. They direct us in this process, but you can see the general fund is the far left. There's right at $11 million in the general fund. These are all different bank accounts. The general fund is the one that we're going to spend our most time talking about tonight. That's where our carryover is part of, as well as the general operating of the district. All the way down to the BOCES fund that is right at $100,000. So we have a vast accounting. So the general fund is the one that we're going to talk about first. This is the operating fund of the district. That's where salaries and benefits are paid out of. That's where our utilities are paid out of, just the general operating account. This is where the school foundation program block grant funnels into. That's the money that we're talking about when we talk through recalibration, is the block grant. It's important when you think about a block grant that you understand that that's a dollar amount that the district is receiving for the Board of Trustees to determine how that's spent. It's not earmarked for particular purposes or particular things. With that, there are some reimbursables, and those reimbursables are subject to change as we walk through recalibration with this legislative cycle. There's a retirement reimbursement, which this year is 2.25% of our salaries. Next year, it's slated at 2.5%. This is the only funding that we receive that's outside of the block grant. That means that it's earmarked for retirement for our employees. Transportation is the other reimbursable that we receive, and right now that's at 100% reimbursement. What that means is that we expend the money this year. Next year, we receive 100% of what was spent on student travel. This is not staff travel. This is student travel. That's bus routes and activity trips. Special ed reimbursement is capped at the 2017-2018 actual expenditures. So what happens, and as we get further out into the slides, you're going to see that we actually are spending more than what we spent in 17-18. The most that we can receive for special education is what was spent in 17-18. And transportation and special ed, as well as the retirement piece, are all slated as part of the recalibration process. So that's projected to change. And then I wanted you to see, the first slide showed you the cash balances as of January 31st. The budget for the general fund for fiscal year 2021, which is the year that we're operating in right now, was $30.7 million. How do we get to that block grant piece? That's the $1 million question, the $30 million question. What happens is we have school resources and district resources that add together to get base resources. The school resources are derived looking at the ADM, the average daily membership of our students, and in getting that average daily membership based upon the grade spans that those students are in and the schools that they attend, a number of students is derived. And that number, I'm going to back up, a number of teachers is derived. And that number of teachers has a dollar value that goes with it. The one piece to notice is the small school prototype. That small school prototype is where LaGrange operates under. And we get a small school adjustment because of having less than 49 students at LaGrange. So we have the school resources that calculates a dollar amount for us based upon number of students. The district resources are derived based upon also number of students, but also square footage and dollar amount of utilities. The district resources, as far as central office staff, it looks at the number of students, the number of ADM, and says up to 1,500 ADM, you can have 3 central office staff. When you get between 1,500 and 5,000, you can have additional central office staff. The utilities are derived based upon the square footage of our buildings, and that's calculated with the school facilities department. But the utilities, as well as the maintenance staff, looks at the number of maintenance staff, custodial staff, and groundskeepers. And those are calculated and tallied for the district. Again, those two pieces get the base resources.
Sorry, just
No.
one moment. The central office staff that you just described, was that a illustration, or was that actually, that when you said 3 office staff, or was that an actual number that the funding model supports?
That is not the present funding model. That is one of the proposals that's out there on the table, if you will. Right now, it funds slightly more than that.
One other thing, could you address the alternative school prototype also in reference to when, now that we do have an alternative school within the district, and why we wouldn't see those dollars this year when it started?
Sure. Platte River School, which is the alternative school, what happens is we have to go out and actually operate 2 cycles in order to have that school be established. Because right now, we're working off of Torrington High School's numbers from last year. So then we have Platte River School operate this year, which is going to get us into the next 2 years of funding. And the alternative school is one of those pieces that has been kind of in and out of the model, in that up until last year, there was a moratorium on alternative schools. They allowed alternative programs, but not alternative schools. So we talked through the base resources, which is the big pot, the big dollar amount. From that base resources, there's a regional cost adjustment that's then applied. And that's a multiplier, which the regional cost adjustment calculates, based upon consultants, the cost of living in various different cities and counties in Wyoming. There is a hold harmless of 100%, and that's where Goshen County lies. So we don't gain, we don't lose with the regional cost adjustment. The external cost adjustment is an inflation factor that you often hear in various different organizations, where maybe that's the increase that they're applying to their employees' salaries for that year. We have not been consistent with the external cost adjustment, and this is one of the places where the legislature tends to pull back and not always apply an external cost adjustment. So we get our base resources, to that's applied the regional cost adjustment as well as the external cost adjustment. There is a hold harmless or a small district adjustment. We are not a small district. That is districts under 243 students. So that's like Sheridan 3 and Du Bois, and some of those places fall under that. We have a small school, but not a small district. To that are those reimbursements that I referenced, special ed being capped at 17-18 expenditures, transportation right now being 100%. Isolation and maintenance are those instances where we can't get buses to places to pick up kids. We do have the capability to then pay an isolation payment for that additional mileage to get those students to school. And then teacher extra pay and special tuition, that doesn't apply to Goshen County. So when you multiply and add those up, we get to the foundation program guarantee. The foundation program guarantee is what the model says Goshen County School District should receive. From that, we then have local resources that we have to back out. And what happens is that we get property taxes from the county treasurer, and those are where the local resources come into play. There's a 6 mil levy and a 25 mil levy that residents see on their property taxes, because those are paid directly to the school district. That, the county treasurer pays those directly to the school district. We then have to subtract those off of the foundation guarantee. Fines and forfeitures, people that have their taxes on vehicles, Taylor grazing, railroad car company taxes. There's taxes based upon every rail car that goes through Goshen County. And then at the bottom, cash reserves. The interesting piece of cash reserves is that's if we go over that 15% carryover. That then gets subtracted from the foundation program guarantee. So what happens is our foundation guarantee is 30 million of local resources, and these are hypotheticals, we get 10 million, then we're going to get 20 million in an entitlement payment. That entitlement payment is going to come monthly, spread out over 10 months. That's why right now we have $11 million in the bank. You may, as you see that, you may see it grow a little bit because we're going to have 2 months. We're going to have July and August in the summertime when we're not going to get a foundation payment, that we have to be able to have money to make payroll and accounts payable during that time frame. Recapture districts are those districts that are a little bit more wealthy than we are as far as our property and mineral taxes. So they actually are seeing money from their county treasurers that exceed their foundation guarantee, and they're paying money back to the state instead of receiving additional money. So when you look through that process, do you have questions in regards to the block grant or how we get our money?
I have a couple, I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
I guess the first would be cash reserves, if applicable, are on there as a local resource. So although we're doing our due diligence and being fiscally conservative by maintaining a rainy day fund, if you will, it actually harms us in terms of the foundation guarantee. Is that what I'm hearing?
What happens and what you're saying is somewhat correct in that right now we're capped at only being able to maintain a 15% carryover. So if we exceed 15%, let's say we have an additional $500,000. So we go to a little over 16%. That $500,000 gets sent back to the state through the reduction as part of the local resources. There has been legislation in the past. Mr. Kramer was sharing with me that there may potentially be some legislation this year where they look at and talk about increasing that cash reserves. We're going to look at a slide a little bit later on where you're going to see that this is going to be a conversation that we're going to need to have because nobody wants to send money back to the state. We want that money to be spent on our students.
So what you're saying is that in this calculation, that's any of the excess over 15% if we were to get to that point. So that's where it actually gets, when like last meeting, I said we have to send it back. If we get over 15%, that's where that comes into play.
Yeah.
And in reality, have we ever been over the 15%? Couldn't you just prepay something before you got to the 15%?
That is where between yourselves as the board, myself and Mr. Kramer, that you're exactly right. There's insurance to be prepaid, or maybe computers for the next year purchased in the existing year, or there's things to do. But all parties have to see the benefit of that.
The challenge is what you're going to see in later. The challenges that you're going to see is in later slides in the uniqueness of just last 2 budget years that are really dramatically affecting us in normal years, where we're able to plan things out in a more normal rate, or the legislature has enacted things at an earlier time period. The planning piece is really important, and you kind of see how this is going to be an extremely unique situation we're going to find ourselves in. Because I agree. I mean, coming from a state that didn't have that cap, that wasn't appropriate for schools either. there's an appropriate amount. I firmly believe, I like the way the state of Wyoming does it. The one thing I would advocate right now for is we've experienced two extremely unique situations in 2 years in a row that are causing some challenges, as we'll kind of see with the later slides here.
And Trustee Hager, at the last meeting when we were talking about some of there was a 10-year carryover or history carryover that we handed out. So you can refer to that too, but just in a nutshell, we've never gotten over the 15%.
I have one more quick question, backed up just a little bit. When you're talking about reimbursements, that's basically just, we spend the money, keep track of it, and then the state reimburses us for that, like example, the transportation.
That is a very easy way to think about it. What happens is it's reimbursed as part of that block grant. So it comes in that annual payment amortized out over 10 months. It's not a check specifically for special ed or specifically for transportation, but it is figured as a separate component that comes back into the block grant for the board to determine how that money's spent. But it is, we spend the money this year, we get that money the next year.
Is that the case, like we talked about with our bus purchase? That not coming in the 1 year, but it coming in over, divided even further beyond the 10 payments, divided further to, what was, you had mentioned it.
Bus purchases are the one exception. And bus purchases are amortized over 5 years. So the thought process is that if we acquire a bus, typically we would need to lease the bus. And because of leasing a bus, you make lease payments annually for 5 years. So the state right now has the reimbursement for buses, whether it be a purchase or a lease, where we receive that over 5 years.
So sorry, I asked another question, but
No,
so,
you're good.
just so I'm 100% clear. So you said we get reimbursed 100% of the transportation?
Right now we do.
So, okay. So then what, would it do us any good if we tried to, like next year or the next, save a little bit of money, like per bus routes or per bus drivers, or, I mean, if we get paid in full, no matter what we do? Or,
You know what, that's been a very hard thing, because we've tried to be efficient and make sure that we have full buses and that we're not putting just a few students on buses, or that when we're traveling out of district that maybe we put 2 teams on 1 bus, just trying to be fiscally responsible. As the years progress, and one of the items with recalibration is talking about maybe getting 80% of the transportation expenses reimbursed the next year. So that's where those efficiencies are going to come into play. And they're talking about like some scenarios are just a flat % of expenditures. Others are looking at caps based upon prior year expenditures. So it really is hard to tell what it might look like. But
so more than likely, it won't stay at 100%.
I don't see, just personally, where they can cap special ed and not put some kind of barriers on transportation.
The dilemma that I see on all of this is what the district did in 17-18 in regards to special education. The district, trying to be fiscally responsible, did not chose methodically which positions not to replace as they had resignations and things. Unfortunately, then the state capped those years in which the district was extremely fiscally responsible and said, now you're funded on the year that you were trying to help us out. And actually now we're taking a punishment because we were fiscally responsible on behalf of the state when we didn't have to be. And that's what I foresee in transportation. This year, we're being extremely responsible, cutting our costs, not traveling as much for extracurriculars, all those things. And we're gonna come and get a cap set on us, and it's gonna hurt us in the end. And even before this, to me, I can control transportation expenditures so much easier than I can control special education expenditures. Special education expenditures are so specifically tied to individual students in relation to their individual education plans that if the IEP team determines there's a need for, either programming or individuals to assist in that student, that has to be done. And that's where special education costs are very challenging to control. But transportation, we can make, just like we did this year, being fiscally responsible is much more easy when you're talking about cutting down on trips, consolidating. Now, without COVID, it would have been even easier this year because instead of taking 2 buses for, some of our teams, we could take 1. And there's ways we can be more fiscally responsible, but unfortunately, the system that we currently have doesn't reward districts for doing that, which is challenging. I mean, it doesn't kind of make sense. And it's the same way we'll see with our carryover. It's kind of it's not a fun situation that we're gonna find ourselves in.
Just one more question. On the previous slide, you had mentioned a small district benefit. Is that why you see school districts such as Plat 1 and Plat 2 is because it increases funding to go to that small of a district size?
What they're doing with this, are you talking the small districts?
Yes.
Okay. What happens there is that they're looking at what's needed for bare bones operation of that district. And, getting to just 243 students, that's pretty tiny. So they're looking at, the administration, the teachers, all that stuff, but that's what that is.
The difficulty in looking at those consolidation of districts, like Plat 1, Plat 2, you can probably say there are some things that make sense with that. When we look at Laramie 1 and Laramie 2, then the difficulty becomes which salary schedule do they work off of? You have 2 larger districts there where you have Niobrara 1 sitting with one of the smaller districts in covering an entire county. I think the committee work makes sense to me to take a look statewide, but then overarching, say, every county having 1 district, that seems to be, I don't think you can make that determination. I think you need to look at where you can have some efficiencies and where there might not be those efficiencies that exist. But yeah, that funding source is kind of unique, and it makes, there's benefits to it on good years when we're financially stable, because we know that assists a lot of our students in Wyoming, which is again unique in the population that we serve. But it also makes it difficult when we have situations where we have a small school reimbursement too, that are necessary to keep those open. But as to when making those difficult decisions, it makes it even more difficult because of the revenue generated from those.
Other questions on general fund?
One thing I would encourage also our legislators to take a look at, and this comes from experience, is incentivizing sharing and finding ways to uniquely look at ways to find ways that districts can share systems and incentivizing those systems to be in play as opposed to forcing those, because we know that creates a lot of animosity and there creates a lot of challenges, and you have a lot more difficulty following through and passing those. But if you incentivize those, districts will look to try to look at unique ways of saving dollars if there's benefits to the individual students within the district. And it doesn't completely wipe away the problem, but I know speaking from experience, coming from a state that did have some financial difficulties in regards to funding education, the incentivized pieces there allowed districts to look at unique ways of funding their students and still maintaining some of the services that were really, really vitally important to them as a district, rather than a full consolidation.
Well, and I think you folks may not realize this. An example is Niobrara County up in Lusk. When we purchase our paper, Goshen County School District can get a semi-load of paper, and Niobrara County doesn't have the resources to store that semi-load of paper. So they work with us and bring a trailer down, and one year it may be 4 pallets, and another year it may be 5 or 6. But we allow them to purchase paper through us at that reduced price. So that's just, it's a very small example, but it's what they're trying to do on a larger scale. So the second fund that was across that table is the Capital Construction Fund. This fund was budgeted at $154,000. It's a restricted, committed, or assigned specifically for capital expenditures. This is money that the district has set aside exclusively for that purpose. Some of the tech Wi-Fi project that Mr. Foster had last month was approved to be paid out of capital construction.
What is the capital threshold? What is considered capital? Is it $1,000, $2,000, $5,000? What above what dollar amount?
5,000.
Above 5,000.
Yep.
Thank you.
Wrong direction. Major maintenance. This is one the building committee spent some time with last night. We've worked through some major maintenance expenditures at past board meetings. The parking lot project was funded out of major maintenance. These are funds that are restricted for the specified purpose of maintaining the buildings. The funds come from the school facilities department, and the projects are approved by the school facilities department. Annually, we receive funds from the state. This is one of the funding areas that we may see some adjustments to. On average, we've received $1.7 million per year. And this is part of the state need to adjust and restructure that we don't know what major maintenance money will look like in the future. Right now, it's tied to allowable square footages as designated through the school facilities department. And we had a $1.8 million budget in fiscal year 21. The special revenue fund is another fund that's restricted. This is where our grants funnel through. This can be state or federal grants. We will see added activity in this fund this year, as this is where the CARES dollars that we have received thus far, and then any future CARES dollars would come through the special revenue fund. We were dealing with a $2 million budget this year.
But that does not include CARES money yet?
No,
Okay.
no. We are still speculating as to how much those CARES dollars may be for the second round.
They are currently working on that along the state level to get us a exact number. I'll probably know more tomorrow morning during our superintendent's state meeting, but I know as of last week, they were trying, they have the dollar amount for the state. they have not allocated exactly what that might look like at each individual district level.
And Marcy, you said that, or maybe I was writing something down, I might have missed it. The special revenue, they're restricted to what we can spend it on. So wherever that money's coming from, there is a list of like limitations that we're allowed to use that money for.
For instance, this is where our federal grants, Title I, those are specified for particular schools and particular grade spans. The federal 6B grant is specified for special ed. So we have very specific parameters, and when we request the funds as part of the grant process, we provide a budget as to how those funds are going to be spent.
So which of these aren't restricted? Because you said this one's restricted, but there's some that aren't.
The general fund is the that's the main operating fund, and that's not restricted.
But all the rest are.
Yep, restricted or committed. The recreation fund is committed, and this is for those of you on the rec board that are going to be meeting here in the next couple of weeks. This is where the 1% mill levy that the school district levies for the rec board, the funds are committed for the specific purpose as designated in the bylaws of the rec board. We are the pass-through entity. We receive the funds and then we redisperse those funds based upon the awarded projects through the rec board. This is generating approximately $200,000 per year, with $204,000 budgeted last year.
So that 1% mill levy, that's just for Goshen County. So that's really not coming from state funds. It's coming from our own 1% mill levy from Goshen County, correct?
Correct. Yep. This is strictly Goshen County property owners.
Just going back to the restricted funds, since the general fund is like the most volatile fund this year, there is opportunities to move things that generally come out of general fund into the restricted funds, correct?
We did talk about some things yesterday with the major maintenance fund, where, for instance, like the screening of the gym floors, we were speaking about that yesterday. That in the past had been expended out of the general fund, but we were able to seek approval from the school facilities department and then move that expenditure to major maintenance. So that's what we're going to be looking at is in particular the major maintenance fund and what things can we transition to there and free up some funds in general fund. Thanks, Taylor.
So related to the rec fund specifically, because we're a pass-through entity, I know like when I apply for, if we as the hospital were to apply for a grant, there's administrative fees by the granting agency that are on there. So 20% of the grant actually goes back to the granting agency for administration. As a pass-through entity, your time, et cetera, is there any fee that comes out of this to the school district?
At the present time, not.
Okay.
Are you aware of any districts around the state that do have a allocation that is set aside from the rec fund to that for that exact purpose?
I think that the biggest difference is those higher assessed valuation counties and districts whose mill generates more than ours, that I don't know if they're actually seeing the fees coming off of that, but they're able to fund things like rec centers and that type of thing where we simply are looking at recreation primarily for the youth in the community. And that's been the focus.
Marcy, are you aware of any other districts taking a percentage of that money in order to cover their administrative costs?
I haven't asked the question.
Okay,
It's,
but nothing's ever, you haven't ever caught wind of that.
I haven't talked about that, but I can definitely research it. Okay.
So everything like the laws with that rec fund, and I'll probably learn that at the meeting, but is that's like its own set of bylaws? Not necessarily combined with the school district? I mean, like the rec board could make, what if the rec board decided to take for the county 0.5% instead of 1%? Can that happen, or?
The school district is the one that actually levies. So the school district would have to make a decision if it were chosen to levy less than the full 1%. That's the most that could be levied. That this body would have to make that decision for that. But then the dollars are available for the rec board, who is an entity that has the bylaws that determines how to decision those projects. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
The lunch fund is actually an enterprise. The lunch fund is set in its own account solely for the operation of the food service activity of the district. In a normal year, it would be revenues from parents, students for meal purchases, and then expenditures for salaries and food purchases. Because of the uniqueness of COVID, the federal government said all students would eat for free. So our revenues at the present time are coming straight from the federal government. And then the expenditures are in the form of salaries and food purchases. We typically do have to transfer between $75,000 and $150,000 per year in order for this fund to break even. The federal government has a cap as to how much we can actually charge for our meal purchases. And so I believe we're very efficient in our costs, but there still have been those years when we've had shortfalls. And this fund is budgeted at $900,000. It fluctuates between $900,000 and $1 million.
So the fluctuation between the 75,000 or the 150,000, is that just enrollment, or what was the, why is there such, that's twice as much, why is there such a fluctuation yearly, between those two? What was the cause of that? Just out of curiosity.
Some of it has been money expended for equipment in those kitchens. Your reference to student population also comes into play in that we receive funding based upon what classification of meal we're providing in a normal year. We get so much for a paid meal and so much for your reduced meal. And of course, we get less money than for a paid meal than what a student would typically pay. So all of that goes into that equation.
When you say you transfer it, you're transferring out of the general fund into there to cover it?
Yes, yes.
One of the difficulties in the lunch funds are twofold for our district. You have your largest high school serving very few meals. And so the numbers are meaningful. The challenge in high school at THS is even if you wanted to have the closed campus or anything like that, you don't have the space to do that, so it's a dilemma. The other piece with lunches on other districts that have been able to find ways of making it cash equal are instituting a pretty extensive a la carte menu. The difficulty with that is your nutritional value in an a la carte menu goes way down. And then really what you're doing is you're taking from your individual students who potentially may not always make the best decisions in those situations at lunch. And then they are buying things that are, one, not healthy, and probably they're supporting on the backs of those individual students to make your lunch program in the black. So it's a difficult balance on lunch programs. It's a really challenging situation.
Well, and the other piece that Mr. Kramer didn't mention is when you talk about closing campus at a high school, you then have the local businesses that are benefiting from those students exiting the school that then are frustrated if they don't see that revenue. So it's a catch-22.
Hey, Marcy, before we move on, and this might be a question that I'm not sure if it's appropriate here or not, but I'm going to ask it. So how does a school, if you're saying that the federal government is paying for all students for our lunches, how does a school qualify as a Title I school with that happening?
Carlos, they're working on various different ratios and meal patterns. And that's something that the state and the federal government are actually working on right now, because that is a very large dilemma, in that Title I schools are decisioned based upon free and reduced population. And that's something that's being worked on right now. Good question.
Thank you.
When we went into the free meals for all students, that was a big concern. So as we're nearing the end of the funds, the activity fund, this is a fund that the money in here is held in trust, meaning that the students fundraise for a particular purpose. That money is held in the activity fund, and then when their purpose arises, the money is then expended for that particular purpose. Most commonly, it's supporting student activities not funded by the general fund. And this one is budgeted at $500,000.
And one thing that is challenging to sometimes wrap your head around initially seeing these, the activity fund is not the extracurriculars. It is not what funds extracurriculars. This is activities that either fundraise on their own. It is a more or less holdings location, a savings for those individual entities, not for your extracurricular activities. Your extracurricular activity expenditures are related to the general fund. So that's something that kind of can easily be, when we look at activities, your mind immediately goes to the activities or extracurriculars. It's two different things.
So when, say, the volleyball team or the football team sell the cards, or the tennis team has some sort of fundraiser, and the purpose is so they can get new uniforms or equipment or whatever, this is where that stuff goes.
Correct. The BOCES fund is the last fund that was in the chart of our 8 funds. This is a half mill levy. This is coming from Goshen County property owners. It's generating approximately $100,000 per year. And this fund is committed for higher education. The money funnels through the Eastern Wyoming Board of Cooperative Education Services, EW BOCES, that's Eastern Wyoming College, BOCES. This pays for the dual and concurrent enrollment for our high school students and driver's education for Goshen County School District students. This had a budget of $300,000. Before we move to the next portion of the presentation, do you have any questions about any of the funds or any of the areas where we hold our money? I thought it was important to go back and look at some past history because we're talking about dollars, we're talking about budget reductions. I felt like it was important to give those of you new to the board and those of you maybe that don't remember some of the years that we've been through and some of the staffing reductions that have taken place. I went back to fiscal year 2018, which is 2017, 2018. We had 9 certified positions and 1 classified position that we reduced. Fiscal year 19 was a large year. We had 1 administrative position, 5 certified, and 8 classified. And then fiscal year 20, which would have been 1920, there were 7 certified positions and 2 classified positions. It's important for you to recognize and understand that many of these were through attrition. That's retirements and resignations. Not all of them, but many of them were. They were programs that were eliminated or educational opportunities that maybe were deemed that like Lingle and Southeast could be serviced through Torrington. For example, we had a year where family consumer science was just offered in Torrington. We had a year when we said we weren't going to offer French anymore as a foreign language. We've had some different positions where we saw some efficiencies and didn't replace people as they quit. We've had some bubble classes at the elementary levels where we were able to reduce those classes. In some cases, we had some efficiencies we were able to gain at the secondary level and actually have some larger class sizes. So that's some of the history of these types of conversations that we're having.
Do you have the total number of FTEs employed by the district in each of these fiscal years? The reason why I ask is I think we do this hard lifting, but I know in my professional career, we'll do the same type of hard lifting and then all of a sudden over the next 2 years, those FTEs come back. And so through various forms, they just show up. So I think that FTE number would probably be important to see there as well.
Okay.
One thing Marcy and I talked about too was the importance of reflection 2 on staff member to student ratio. That even though you have a declining enrollment, which allows you to reduce staff members, in some cases, and actually on many of the cases, you're still, even though you've had this drop, you're increasing your student to teacher ratio because you were at, not 1 student for every or 16 students for every 1 employee or 1 staff member certified. Then you had the ability because you had fewer students to reduce staff. But now your ratio is every 18 students you have 1. So there is a challenge. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was most recently Senator Barrasso spoke with Torrington High School. And one of the students talked about specifically the music department and an ability that we had last year because of fewer students at TMS and fewer students at THS to have a reduction in the instrumental music area. There was that piece and we've been able to do and survive and still maintain that program, but we have to acknowledge there has been a change of services for those kids. There is a dramatic increase in students per staff member. And we have to make those difficult decisions, but we also have to, one thing I always have to tell myself in looking at these lists and budgets, that every single cut, no matter if we could still maintain the program, affects students, because that individual attention that they were receiving just last year may not exist in that area this year because the teachers are having to teach that many more classes and things. And so I thought that staff to student ratio is really important to think about, because we are changing programs. You know, even though we think, and I am 100% on the same boat, the challenges of having to make reductions, the effects that it does have on students as we go forward.
So the next slide is the slide that we've referenced throughout the evening when we talk about carryover and we talk about what might the budget year look like when we finish up in June 30th, 2021.
Marcy, can I touch on one more thing?
Sure.
One thing too, as I look at that list, the classified one is another difficult one, because we probably do have a higher number. I would say this is probably what I'm thinking about as a special education component, where many of those positions in classified were considered general education classified positions, helping a whole classroom of students to supplement. But now we may have that equal number or had to hire back a classified position, but that is individually to support an individual student. And then also tied either to federal dollars that are Title VI dollars and in those things. And that's where the classified ones get really difficult. But we also know and can identify areas like family and consumer science, French that are just no longer there. So thank you for that, Marcy. I don't want to
Nope, that's
forget
good.
about that.
So if we look at the reductions that we've been implementing as we've looked at this year, as well as what COVID has done for us when we look at the budget, we are sitting at about an $800,000 reduction in expenditures than what we're budgeted. And these are all sorts of different things. We were able to incorporate overtime for custodians. We knew we were going to have extra costs due to cleaning and activity coverage. So we were able to place that into the first round of CARES dollars. That's $50,000. We have a certified tutor position that THS had budgeted that they didn't replace. There was a special ed teacher that was a late hire that has several months of insurance as well as retirement and several months of salary that we didn't incur. There were two special ed pairs at THS that weren't replaced. Transportation is a big one right now. We have activity trips that we had budgeted for. Those were hours for our activity bus drivers to actually drive these buses. And a lot of those were either reduced in quantity or reduced in scope, which we aren't traveling as far. We don't have overnight stays. We're staying in this very close area. So that's at a substantial dollar amount of $70,000. And then we have the fuel that we don't appear to be spending on student travel. At the staff travel level, there again, our staff have not traveled to professional development. We've been able to do it all through Zoom and Skype and that type of thing. So we haven't had that fuel cost. There was an HR position, a human resources position that was budgeted for that hasn't been filled. One of the big outliers with special ed is out of district placement. And that's students where we make the decision for them to be placed outside of the district, both in an educational setting as well as a residential setting. And that one you hope you know of your students, but one new student moves into the district that needs this placement, and that can throw your budget one direction or the other. We, so far, based upon our existing placements, we have 60,000 that was budgeted for that purpose that doesn't look to be being spent. Past years, we paid for out-of-school suspension for students, and we've been able to structure that differently this year and have not had much expense with that. Culminating travel, as I visited about activity trips, our culminating travel is where the district funds for the students that qualify for regionals and state, and there typically are meals and lodging involved in that. And any teams that have qualified for the culminating events, they've been one-day trips. So we have not had the lodging or the meals that were budgeted. And then we were able to be more efficient both in speech and OT, where we were able to contract with outside service providers. And in doing so, those contracts appear to be saving us money over the employees that we had in those positions. So when we talk about where we are in terms of carryover, approximately $300,000 is 1%. So right now I have 800,000 in expenditures that we don't appear to be spending. We have revenue for these expenditures. That's almost 3% that we've talked about being at 14.5%. We are going to have to get creative.
This is exactly what I was talking about before, and the dilemma that we're faced with, because doing the right things over the last 8 months and getting some help. And one thing I do want to touch on, and this is going to be an unpopular thing in some levels of extracurricular activities and in some parts of the state, the way they're doing quads and the way they're doing this, I think the Wyoming High School, and I would encourage you as trustees to call up to the Wyoming High School Athletic Association and let them know, even though much of this was due to COVID, some of these things need to continue because there is savings to be had for districts. Now, they've also had a huge influx of people from certain parts of the state because of, certain teams, in certain parts, not 3 teams being able to come from the southwest portion of the state in Class 1A basketball. And they are facing an unbelievable amount of calls because they have 3 very talented teams, and one of those is not going to get to go to Casper. But you can see the influence that this has had. I mean, when we put this into teacher comparisons, those changes have been significant and need to continue forward. And I know they're not always popular decisions, but if we're looking at the difference between being able to save some dollars at culminating events, but still even able to have culminating events, that's something that we need to take notice of and let them know, thank you for doing it this year. Please continue to look at ways for districts like ourselves to save dollars moving forward, because that is significant. The other piece that this kind of generates some more challenges is we were already very close to that 15% threshold. And this is why it is going to be very important for us legislatively to look, because this is such a unique year. We can go down that list and say, in typical years, those things, some of those are occurring, but not all together. And to even be able to, the dramatic difference in our district, and it's unique because we talk about budgeting and being off a little bit. And Marcy, you'll be able to put a dollar sign to this, but if we hire a employee and we budgeted for that person to be our employee and also take family insurance, but let's say we hire a employee and they have a spouse in the district, that savings already right there generates approximately, what is the difference there for?
You're looking at $18,000 for a family plan
So,
for
I mean,
insurance.
your budgeting gets really challenging when we account for that, because it's a $20,000 swing for just one employee difference to another, even when you're budgeting. And so I know we've talked about budget in the past and how that difficulty, but this kind of exemplifies the challenge that we faced. And some of those being fiscally responsible and looking ahead and knowing we don't want to make those expenditures. And we don't want to also turn around and tell an employee less than 8 months after we hired them, sorry, we're going to have to cut your position. It's much easier to not replace that and figure out how we can adapt.
So if we look at our carryover balance, and this is the same slide, I think Chairman Jesperson, you might have referenced this one a little bit earlier. The amounts haven't changed. Prior to and before that last slide, we're at 14.55%. The history is important. We have not gone over 15% in the past. If you go back to 2010, our low has been 11.29%. So I think the legislative issues kind of prompted this, but I hope that some of the funding and better understanding where our money is at and what's available to us for the different expenditures has helped. I want to reiterate this when we look at what we may be in store for with the legislative session. You need to remember that this is general fund. This is the operating fund of the district. This is the large pot of money. This has changed a little bit from when we spoke prior to at the last board meeting, in that I received some clarification in regards to the 3-year rolling average. I was looking at it just based on a reduction of students, thinking that the 3-year rolling average was no longer available to us, and it is still part of our funding model. So what happens is we have to look at where we were January 31st. We look at where we finished last May, and then we have to look at the 3-year rolling average of prior years. So we actually are seeing a 3-year rolling average projected of FY21 being 1,622 students. If we look at that 1,622 students versus our rolling average from last year, which was 1,652 students, that's a reduction of 29 students versus the reduction of 70 that I was planning for. That's about half. We were saying $1 million, that's $446,000. But I think we also have to look at that special ed cap that I spoke about in the reimbursement of special ed, and the fact that we don't get all of that special ed money back, and that special ed was overspent. They exceeded their allocation by $213,000. And then we have some unknowns of what the legislative session may look like. And we're using a $340,000 figure. We don't know. Recalibration is throwing out a 6.54% reduction, which is the $100 million statewide. It could be more than that, and we need to be ready for that. So that's where that $3 million in total is coming from. Questions? Chairman Jesperson, I think I'm going to turn it back to you unless,
Can I
There's
just
more.
ask one question?
Yep.
So the state requires us to have a budget finished on what day?
well, there's several different dates that we deal with. We're required to notify employees if they're not going to be coming back to the district by April 15th. And the legislative session is slated to end April 2nd, which is very close. At the April meeting, you receive a list of employees either rolling into continuing contract or going forward into that process. So we have that April 15th deadline, and then our final budget has to be approved by the third Wednesday in July. So technically we are operating 2.5 weeks without a budget.
The other challenge that these numbers also don't come into play is the other unknown of the CARES 2 dollars. There will be revenue that will be generated from CARES 2. Now, that doesn't mean that every position that we take a look at right now will be the same position. It could mean that a art teacher at the elementary, in order to support CARES dollars, become an intervention specialist over the next year. But that does mean that we would not necessarily have to cut that individual and lose that individual as an employee, but their job may be different because we want to utilize and allocate those CARES funds to support our current programming and how we can do that. Now, there's also situations that we're coming upon that we know based on numbers and based on realistic things, and that's what the administrators are having conversations about right now, are stating we do have an ability right now because of our numbers, our staff to pupil ratio or course offerings don't illustrate a need for that many sections. And so those teachers may have been shared that information that they plan to reduce and force that position, or we plan to not replace those positions that may have retired.
Okay. Will the board be made aware of those positions that that are not going to be refilled? Well, not refilled, or the people that have received notice?
Yep.
So,
And some of those we're right on that cusp of whether we're trying to allow people who we know that information to give them and be transparent as possible to that. The other difficulty with that is some of those positions do have some situations that it might still necessitate, based on student interest, based on student numbers, a need to still maintain that position. So it gets a little bit tricky. It gets a little bit more unique and challenging during these next weeks ahead of us.
so the CARES Act, basically, it complicates things exponentially at this point, and I don't want to say it allows us, but unfortunately, it gives us maybe the opportunity to kick the can down the road, so to speak, on some of this stuff, because it's not an accurate representation of what our funding will look like 5 years down the road, or even 2 or 3 years down the road. I think that's something that we need to take into account and think about very strongly, because it's giving us a cushion that we won't have forever.
And that's exactly, you're absolutely right. And I look at that too, very similarly to our carryover dollars. What to me makes sense is we need to sustain the storm we're in now, with the hopes that in 2 or 3 years, we can get to a point where there's stability within the state of Wyoming, and we can plan ahead, because having those conversations in October and November are dramatically different than having them and having to let that person know in less than a week. You're not going to be able to have your position that you currently have. And so that's why it is important. The more time we can, and it is, kicking the can down the road, you're absolutely right. what I found is that so much changes even 2 to 3 years that we don't anticipate. When you're able to delay those and maintain a high quality of individuals within your system, you do have an ability either through next year, because individuals this year weren't ready for retirement, but we have another 5 that are ready and we can still maintain them and we don't have to reduce the force. It's an interesting shell game, but that's exactly what it is. It's really challenging to kind of move that down, especially in this really unique fiscal times for Wyoming. I was just gonna, Senator Steinmetz has been gracious enough to sit through the work session and join us. I know she's extremely busy in the things that she's working on and preparing for the legislative session to start March 1st. But Senator Steinmetz, if you'd like to input any information or if any trustees would have any.
Yes, can you hear me? Is my connection okay? Hello? Can you hear me? Is my connection all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Yes, well, one of the things I wanted to just speak with you about a little bit is the Medicaid, the school services and Medicaid billing. We heard that today in the Senate Appropriations Committee meeting. That is something that we're looking at possibly being able to help with the special education costs that we are reimbursing. And so we're hoping that that would then free up some other dollars for education, and we wouldn't have to reduce quite as much as we're anticipating. And so that was just something I did want to bring up, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have from your end for me now.
I'll just jump in before we get to another topic. Thank you, Senator Steinmetz. The Medicaid billing and coming from the state that has utilized that significantly in the past. State of Iowa, it does make a significant impact and can make a significant impact. I know that I am not familiar completely with some of the plans that have been discussed for the state of Wyoming. I do know some of the challenges that have existed with that Medicaid billing are the paperwork side of that also. And that's one that I hope it doesn't involve, we have a nice balance of revenue and not an overabundance of paperwork that would hurt them. Thank you for speaking to that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and the Department of Health is really working to try to help you guys with that, as well as there's some school districts that are utilizing a system that can be upgraded easily. So we're hoping that they will be the pilot program to start out. It'll be a voluntary program and then possibly move into a mandatory program by 2023. But I wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. If you have any comments on that, that bill will be moving through the process. It's a Senate file and we started it today.
One of the things that I know, I was with Wyoming Child and Family, we did do Medicaid billing. And it got to be a problem simply because there was a cap on the number of times anybody could bill Medicaid for a child. And when you have a child that's on special education and mental health and going to the doctor consistently, it was a race to try to get it in before their cap was done.
That's good insight. Thank you for that.
Well, Senator Steinmetz, thanks for that information, because I think, if there's anytime we can do something that is, I guess, in my world, it's more income driven versus cutting expenses, where this Medicaid thing helping to offset some of or helping to fund some of that special ed costs that we're incurring. I think that's a nice step to help, at least,
there, it helps. So I appreciate the information on that. Is there any other like updates with some of these other bills that are going through that you can give us, just so we have an idea of, because that's one of the unknowns we're dealing with right now. So is there any light you can shed on any of that stuff that would kind of help us as we attempt to make decisions going forward?
I really wish there were, but we're so close to just starting this session. I think the education committee met today, but because I was on appropriations, I'm not sure what transpired in their committee. As you know, we'll go into session on March 1st in our in-person session, and that's when things will really begin to move along. And most of the individual bills will have to be numbered by the 5th of March, so we won't even know completely what's out there until then. But I would be glad to, as I see things move along, keep in touch via email and just let you know what I'm seeing, so that it can help inform some of your decisions.
Great, thank you.
You bet. Well, if you don't have any more questions for me, I think that I will sign off, as my connection is poor at best.
Well, thank you for taking the time this evening and for the information you give us.
You bet. I'm glad to help any way I can, and I will send back any information that I get that will be helpful. So thank you guys, and have a good evening.
I do have, I guess, I don't know if it's a comment or maybe it'll turn into a question, but it goes back to that, the cost savings that we've presented, that slide that had the 800,000 of cost savings we've had. So you're saying that that's on top of everything else that you projected? And I'm referring back to this report that we had from the last meeting. You had it up on the screen. So am I correct in assuming then that if we have that on top of everything else that we're doing, we're actually looking at being over our 15%?
You are correct.
So it's almost, by my quick calculations, almost 660,000.
The information that's been shared with you, 14.55, is simply based upon the budget that was approved in the activity as part of that budget. Then we have to look at what expenditures took place and what activity took place. And as we discussed, we knew early on that we were going to be going into hard times. And so there were some positions not replaced. There were some positions that maybe we didn't have the best candidate for the position. There also is the environment that we're in with COVID, and that has caused some of those opportunities for savings.
To add on to that, is there a restriction on those items that we can prepay for the next year? So can we prepay personnel, or does it have to be supplies or something tangible?
As far as my knowledge, it has to be something that we actually have the invoice for. So for instance, we will be looking at, and I will be recommending that we prepay next year's insurance, and that be our property and casualty insurance. What happens is it's for the year July 1 through June 30, but we'll have the invoice for that, and I'll be recommending that we prepay that. Another opportunity that we will have is that we have 1 year left on a bus lease. I'm going to be recommending that we look at prepaid that and essentially paying that off. I'm presently going through and kind of combing it for what opportunities are available. Last year we prepaid, I figured about $450,000, and that was between insurance and then those dues and fees that we typically would pay July 1 that we pay in June.
So I guess, so the CARES Act funding, yeah, counts it as our budget, as the 15%, or how, I mean, how do they justify that, or how does that work through the state, the CARES Act dollars? How do they break that up, or how does that affect our budget? I mean, obviously it does. If we spend $50,000 extra for extra janitorial and all that stuff, is that separate, or how do they?
The CARES dollars go through that special revenue fund, and that's restricted for both state and federal grants. That with those dollars, they were set aside for particular purposes, and that was to be additional cleaning costs that we would be incurring in order to have our schools open at the start of the school year, as well as funding for lost instruction. And so we were able to fund a teacher through there that just does remote instruction. We funded some technology through there. And then just one example was the custodial. We also funded some PPE, protective equipment, masks, that kind of thing. The idea is that it funds things that we wouldn't typically have.
And that's where the challenge is going to be more, because we're going to be, we purchased the PPE we need. Those aren't going to be other things. We purchased the technology we need. Now we're going to have to plan to really, it's a good and bad problem to have. It's good to have those dollars, but it's really going to go towards many of the things within that we typically use general fund wise to support. And so then it bolsters our general fund, which is good, but it also gets us up against that 15%. And that's where that good and bad. And that's why I think it's just really important right now, if you have an opportunity to reach out to any legislators that are involved in regards to having this conversation, that these are two unique years that, again, I will reiterate, I am very supportive of having a cap on it. These 2 years are really unique situations that we find ourselves in, and to handicap schools in a way that hurts them for being fiscally responsible. It just goes against what we know right now. And I'm okay even lowering that down to 10% if that's what gets something through the next 2 years. But this helps us to extend our abilities to, quote unquote, kick the can down the road. So,
Is this something that, like a teacher and staff bonus, we're going through one of the worst years in the history of years, that it could be used for maybe something like that?
It could be a one-time bonus for that exact purpose. We can look at it, and I kind of planted the seed. I don't know that I'm totally ready for it, but we could look at our rotational cycle for computers, and those computers that we typically would fund next year, we can fund those now. It just increases the present workload on Mr. Foster, but that's an option. I think we're Mr. Tucker's needs.
All those things, as you know, it's a balancing act. If you buy those computers now and you use them next year, the warranty doesn't start when we start to use it. The warranty starts today. So it's like Mr. Kramer was saying, between pull here and push it there. So careful what you do.
I have a silly question. Has there ever been a time, probably a long time ago, but has there ever been a time when the state just gives us X amount of dollars
and it's all unrestricted. Has it ever been like that? Where we spend it on what we need to?
The state is going to tell you that what they're doing right now is giving us the block grant for us to spend as is deemed necessary. But there has been since 1997, there's been a calculation to get to that number. But they're right now in them giving us a block grant. It essentially is up to the school board to decide how that's expended.
And I think you're also talking like, you're talking major maintenance ones.
I'm talking the whole, not just the block grant, every penny.
I am not aware of any historical piece of that would have existed. It is interesting in coming from a state that did not, and I think it kind of is related to the amount of funds Wyoming schools have received in the past, because there have been such a significant funds. When you have that level, you can have much more tight oversight, because I have seen that, in my experience of coming from another state. There is a lot more oversight on specific funds than in other states because of the amount of funds. Now, I think that's another piece. As we look towards the financial situation in Wyoming, it's an ebb and flow. To me, if we're not going to have those funds and have the amount of funds we've been used to, then some of those regulatory pieces and stringent requirements need to also then back away, so our local boards can then make more difficult decisions to utilize those dollars in ways that are more important to Goshen County than what might be important at the Department of Education or those types of things. So I see that on the horizon. I'm hopeful for that, because again, I do believe that boards should have a lot of those pieces to be able to say these dollars should go here to support what we feel are the strongest needs.
Superintendent Kramer, I know you mentioned it before, but you basically have 3 different levels. Is that correct, that you're preparing for or looking at? Is that something that, how's that process coming, and is that something that?
Right now, I just have that list in front of me. I have 75 items on that list, ranging. I have assigned a point value to each, ranging from 1 to 6 in the effect that it has on students and staff, and then also to quantifying. One being things like not having, if we've had a resignation, not refilling that position, to the other extreme of building closures or multiple teachers having to be reduced in force. So yeah, we're taking a look at all of those things as, here are where we can go. Here are the things that least affect students. We've had a couple of meetings too, where staff members have discussed, come to me, talked about ideas. Back in 17 and 18, they had an extensive list. We're working off that same list, highlighting those things that have already been done, and taking new things that are already existing. We're also having a meeting because of some recent resignation in central office, having a meeting next Tuesday, talking about what do we want central office to look like that's going to support administration, that's going to support trustees, and that's going to support staff in the best way possible. So pre-planning those things and having those conversations, we're setting ourselves up to be able to take swift action if we have a number amount. What it's going to be is that balance between, we're very similar to where I see our legislature at, where they're going to need to be looking at revenue along with cuts. I feel that we're going to be looking at, here's our carryover, what are we comfortable with this year? Here's our cuts, what are we comfortable with this year? With the plan instead next year, and then the year after, here's what we're comfortable in and looking at utilizing from that to be able to maintain programs, maintain what we've had with students and staff for as long as possible in the financial situation.
Well, I think we'll know a lot more 30 days from now than what we know right now.
100%.
That's the big thing right now. There's so many things that are just unknown that it's hard to even fathom where we're going to be. But in another 30 days, we're going to have a lot better understanding of where we're going to be headed.
And that I've found myself in these situations, in my previous roles. And the hardest part is you want to let individual employees know, but they also understand. One of the biggest things is rumors right now. I mean, and social media is notorious. I mean, heck, after our last meeting, I think I heard we were closing 3 schools, I think I heard on social media. And you know, those type of things in trying to go out there and say, you know what, everything is on the table and nothing is on the table, you know, type of things. We're always thinking about new and innovative ways to have a list where we're choosing from, but it's going to be the job of the trustees to determine what impact that we can lessen on the students, and for people, especially staff and community members, to talk to you as trustees or talk to myself, especially employees. If you hear something, take your time and shoot me an email and verify it, and I can shoot you back real quick. Yep, that's true, or no, that's just rumor, unfortunately. And that's going to be the really important part of the next 30 days. And that's what I see to every legislative session. Every bill that comes out doesn't mean every bill is going to be passed. And that's important too, because we're going to see in the next couple of days some really, really significant bills out there that do have potential that could be passed. And we have to be keeping those in our mind of what we could potentially do there, but not necessarily overreacting and saying that high quality teachers that we have lose those to the rumor that they think they're not going to have a position, where in reality, our plan is to keep them in place right now.
So just thinking forward as planning for the board, for district administration, and for Marcy, and enable to make that April 15th notification date, it would appear that we would need to move our April board meeting to the 6th following the legislative session, but so then you would have a week in order for, because until we know what the budget's going to be, I don't think any of the trustees are going to be comfortable saying, until we know what the cuts are going to be, I don't think the trustees are going to feel comfortable saying we're willing to spend $3.5 million out of the carryover. Once we have that narrowed down, which the 6th is really the closest.
I envision a special meeting in addition to our regular scheduled meeting for April 13th. That once we have more specific information in some of those numbers, or just the fact that we have some knowledge of what legislation has the most likelihood of passing, is conducting a special meeting where that would be the primary discussion on that agenda.
So you're thinking something towards the last week of March, hoping that there's no last minute bills that.
Right. I think
us further.
Yeah, I would say we'll have, when we have these narrowing of, you know, I think our next date is March. We'll know more there because we'll know the bills that have been attached to numbers, you know, which ones have been assigned. Then there's that next step of which ones are making it out of committee, which ones are making it, you know, to the full side, which ones are having likelihood of passing in the House and Senate. Playing, you know, once we have a clearer picture and utilizing our senators and legislators here with their knowledge to tell us, yeah, this looks like we need to prepare for this. I think that's what we can kind of depend on.
A lot of times the bill that's first introduced gets amended so much that it doesn't even represent what the first bill, when they first introduced it, even did. I mean, it's a totally different bill by the time they get done.
Anybody have any other questions or comments? So we'll keep an eye out for special meeting dates later in March, which we can probably discuss at our March meeting. that in mind, I really don't have anything else. Marcy, thank you for your presentation and explaining some of that stuff. Even with my background, some of that stuff was new to me tonight, so I appreciate that. If there's nothing else to come before the board on this matter, I will call us adjourned.